Hi everybody, this is Jock.
Today we're going to do something on education, a lecture that we have.
It seems that a lot of people ask a similar question. What will the schools teach in the future, and who decides what is taught? Is it a board of education? Is it a board of educators that decide that? Nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with the established order. The way it works is children are taught about the environment they live in, how it works, what makes the rain, how water evaporates, how plants expire into the air moisture, how plants grow, what they depend on. They're oriented to the world they live in. That's the only kind of orientation I know of. But to give them any other type of information superfluous to the task when they're very young would not be necessary. So what we have is groups of people, geologists, physicists, naturalists, that instruct children in the way nature works to the best of their ability. But they do use films, and they do take the children out on field trips, so they understand how rivers form, how they zigzag, what makes them do that, and what happens when drought occurs. They're given all the known elements that are known up to that time. And children are curious about all kinds of things, so they ask geologists and geophysicists and the atmospheric scientists, what makes the rain? Where does it come from? So they don't even get a chance to speculate or make up stories. They don't make up stories. They know how bears take care of their young, how bears manage through the environment. And if a man finds that he catches a lot of fish near the big rock, he always instructs his fishery people to go near the big rock. Now, in the South Sea Islands, they do orient people to the island where you catch fish, what you can eat, what's poisonous, what you can't eat. All of the orientation, I should say most of it, is relevant to what they will encounter, except what the witch doctor teaches them. That the volcano is angry or you have to sacrifice people to it. Knowing the difference between relevance and irrelevant is very, very severe in the future. So children will ask certain questions. Not only that, they'll be taken on field trips through the farming industries, the production industries, the metal that supplies the industries. They'll be taken on trips to see how automobiles are made, how transportation units are made, how everything related to their life is made. But they're also taught that innovation and technology will eventually replace routine jobs. They're taught that because a person that does a routine job doesn't learn very much, because the job doesn't change very much. If a man drills holes all day in a factory, he really doesn't learn anything, except when new bits come out that cut the metal faster. But really, it's offensive to teach anyone to be a uniform performer that does the same thing over and over again. Now, all things that are repetitive can be automated. So if you ask me a question, what will children be taught? It depends on the time in the future, what the conditions are. Naturally, if a lot of meteors were landing on the Earth, destroying a lot of areas, change in what children are taught will be modified to meet changing conditions. It's only changing conditions that determine what children are taught. So if you take a child through a factory and show him where all the parts come from, what machines do, what people used to do, how machines replace their jobs, they almost do not have any questions after each day's tour. If the children are taken on a tour through furniture factories, most of the questions they would have related to furniture are answered on that tour. So children rarely have any questions unless a new person comes in and says, I'm going to talk about gravity and the way it changes in different regions of the Earth. So they have a pretty good orientation, and they're always anxious to learn. And they also know how to ask questions like, how do you know that? How did you come to that conclusion? The instructor would have to tell them how he knows that, what method he used to come to that conclusion. And then he'll say to the students, do you find anything incomprehensible that I talked about? Something you don't understand? So the children have a chance to ask questions outside of what normally might be asked. So as the children age, they have a damn good idea of how they relate to the environment. But they have no Mickey Mouse clubs. They have no metaphysical knowledge. They don't even know it exists. They do know that at times people try to account for hurricanes as a punishment to people. They will know that. But sometimes a hurricane occurs where there is no people. So who's getting punished? So they will be given all kinds of examples to support existing and working theoretical systems. So if you ask me again, what will children be taught and who decides? The conditions at the time decide what they're taught. Are there any questions regarding that? As they get older, they will be taught how to manipulate the environment and change it to act in our behalf, such as if certain areas breed certain types of mosquitoes, they will know what area does that and what the conditions are that do that. And so they'll be able to offer possible alternatives to the creation of malaria or other physical disorders. Any questions about that? Adults will be schooled continuously with all television will appear like a newsreel of what's new. But there'll be no man kills wife and children, nobody's concerned about that because those conditions are very rare. You would rarely read about a guy that ran amok shooting a lot of people because the question was, how did he get to that phase? There must be a long interval between aberrant behavior and normal behavior. So it should be outstanding and self-evident. If you make a roof that leaks, it's self-evident right away that that roofing material is not the best we know of. So you don't suddenly surprise yourself by finding human beings that don't stay put. There are a lot of people that say the reason you can't build a future is because human beings don't stay put. They have individual expressions. There's no such thing. You don't have individual expressions. It's always within the context of an island or the resources or the food available in the islands, but it's never outside of that. You'll never see an islander or a group of them that got together that are building a hang glider. It just does not occur. And you'll never find discussions taking issue with the chief or the witch doctor. I take issue with your views. You'll not find that type of discussion on the islands. It does not occur. Is that real clear? Because people say, what about individuality? If people come up with ideas that are totally unrelated to the environment, there's no evidence to support that. I never remember a plumber saying, we ought to prefabricate plumbing so the parts are uniform and they fit all kinds of situations. They're not brought up as economists, material economists. But the field of industrial design used to question things. What is a chair? What's it for? Why does it break down? Why do people move on a chair, keep changing their position? Because of poor circulation. The chair has to allow for movement. It has to allow for the conditions that exist. We can't work outside of that field. I said, what if something brand new happens? I said, like what? A meteor destroys the center of your city. Then we have to start over again. He wants to know what you do under those conditions. That's the only thing you can do. Does that make sense? So the question, what will children learn in the future? All things related to that time and to meet the needs that the questions that the kids would ask would have to meet those needs. And then, of course, there'll be a time when the kids walk away from that situation and other kids ask them, what did you learn today? And you can check them out by how accurate their descriptions are. In other words, to be a news reporter today, you can do what you want to do with the news. You can manipulate it. But in the future, an event occurs and a person reports on the event. Do you know what that means? You have a person reporting an event. You stage it. That occurs. And the kid comes back and says, the man got up early in the morning, a bear approached him, and he used a deflector of this kind to detract the attention of the bear. But he can't add anything that he picked up a shovel and probably tried to use that to keep the bear away from him. No speculation. But when you speculate, all articles will be speculation on the origin of Morse. It'll always tell you when a person is projecting probable cause. It'll always say at the head of the article that this is a speculation by Dr. Jones and Dr. Philip Reed, who speculates that this may have occurred due to that, but this is under speculation. Then it gives findings, that's very different, what we found to occur, or what certain people attribute certain things to. But it'll always be put that way. Do you have any questions of what people will be taught? The adults will be updated constantly. They will no longer play cards or sit at a table playing cards, because that only improves their ability to play cards. Playing chess would do nothing but improve your ability to play chess. The chess games of the future will be on a map, and they'll move objects where malaria is dominant. So when they get through moving these objects, they'll know that South Africa has a higher incidence of malaria than North Africa. You know what I mean? By moving things, just like a chess game, only it'll be about the world and about what we know. There'll be no games that children play except prefabrication assembly systems.
Can you go into like the everyday example of what kids will do, or how they'll learn, or where they'll go, or
that's up to them. They go to where they have questions. They're very tours. Some tours are to transportation systems. Other tours are agronomy. Other tours are geological formations. Whatever the kid picks, he wants to know about. It's best to teach him when he formulates a question, or she. Boys and girls are treated the same way. They're not separate. They use the same washrooms when they're very young.
Do you see like classrooms like they have today?
No, not at all. I see discussion more like we have here. Only kids taken out into the real world, from seed to plant. And they're not given any word like purpose, except the things man makes. The purpose of a bow and arrow was devised as a mechanism. Instead of clubbing the animal, you had a distance advantage. You can launch the bow and arrow, you can launch the arrow before the animal got close to you. The javelin required closer encounters. And you can say that the gun, the development of a gun or a rifle was really not intended to be an equalizer. But it took the big guy and the little guy and gave them equal killing power. But when the big guy used to fight, he used to pick up the little guys and throw them around. So they always wanted big men in the army up front, so they can pick up the other guy. The gun was the equalizer. It made everybody equal. that is, to the killing. Killing was the only means they had in the old days, or enslavement, is get people to do work that other people didn't want to do. So people were enslaved. And also, if you can get people to like the state of slavery, you were very much in demand. If you say, I'm honored to serve King Bojo, they like you. But if you say, I don't like to serve that son of a bitch, you become troublesome. And they whip you until you say, I'm going to serve anybody you tell me to serve. That's forced. If you can raise kids to want to serve in the army, to want to serve the political system, that's much easier than having to wrestle with everybody and their different values. You should be appreciative of your leaders. They're working in your behalf. But you say, look, the leaders work for their own concepts. They don't give a shit about you. If you do that, you'll lose control of people. If you're honest. They keep using the word being honest. How honest can you be? You know, it's ridiculous. But if you're equipped to live in a given environment, you're better equipped or as well equipped as the next person. Will subject matter be taught that is less relevant? Only if it's within the probability of occurrence, such as if in times past, if the Russians came over from Canada or they came over from South America, then you have to have special contingencies department that work on the military systems. But military systems are very crude because they have nothing to do with conditioning. They have little to do with making the world a better place except for those in control. So I would say, to an extent, other ideas will be discussed, but they are within the realm of probability, not just anything. What if a guy doesn't like somebody, he wants to kill him? Or how the hell did he get to be that way? Somewhere down the line, he was a misfit, and it shows up. When a kid, you can see it right away, because all children tend to go rowing. If you put them in a rowboat, they will row. If you want a competition for speed, they will row against one another. But rarely will you find one kid that goes off by himself, unless he's born with horns or he looks very different than other kids, then he be studied. You know what I mean by abnormal formation of a person may invite behavior that's very different. But we know that. We know how to deal with it. Yeah, so what if you don't know how to deal with it? And you can't deal with it. What do you suggest? What if things occur that you don't know how to solve? Then you're going to have problems. Right? All right, or what do you suggest? Always bring that up. Well, I don't know, but you can't make a perfect world. That's what they're trying to say. We're not trying to make a perfect world. We're trying to make a more adequate environment. Is that clear? Yes.
Today they group people with age in schools. Is it that type of thing in the future as well?
No, they group people in terms of values. That's automatic. Like a guy says, well, I have to live next door to a black African. He doesn't want to live next door to you either. You know, so people would want to live where they want to live during the transition.
I'm talking about in education. You know, it's very regimented with everybody a certain age in classrooms.
No, whatever they're ready for, whatever age. There's no such thing as age classification, except in terms of probability of physical disorders, like rheumatism, arthritis, may be related to age or breaking down of the body. They'll have a lot of charts on that. And they'll have a lot of countermeasures that are, in other words, the diet of people 65 and over will be varied as they age. Because if the body can't handle certain things, the physiologist would be working on that. But since there's no sales or profit, they have no reason to emphasize any particular school of thought, except what we know and what we don't know. And there's nothing wrong with a person saying, I don't know. They don't look down at him. He just doesn't have enough information to make a decision or arrive at a decision, which is better than making a decision. You know the difference between arriving at a decision and making a decision? Arriving means you put it to test. You try watering a plant 10 times a day. Does it grow any faster or larger? No, but it consumes more water than necessary. So you have to find out what the ideal mixture of fertilizer is for a given plant. You don't keep fertilizing. Will the plant grow beyond anything in nature if you use more fertilizer? No, it may kill it. So you have to determine all those things. And those things that you have difficulty determining, you put more people on it. And if a task is undesirable, let's say during the transition, we have to clean up radioactive material. Well, you'll be put in a vehicle that's sealed, so you're not poisoned by the radioactive material. And if you operate that vehicle, you operate it for 2 hours a day. You vary the incentive. If we do need people to do dirty work, say coal mining, you work 2 hours a day, 3 days a week. You vary the incentives, you know what I mean? So you can get anybody to do any job if they want a lot of time to themselves. But ultimately, people want the freedom to do what they're inclined to do in the new society. You know what I mean? What they're inclined to do. They have no natural propensities. And the new society will offer a very broad range of, you use the word choice, many options. And the options that you pick will have to do with your state of health and the people you associate with. Yes. No one will say my options are better than yours. That type of conversation will disappear. Oh, I can run faster than you. What's your point? What do you mean? What are you getting at? You know, that's the old world stuff. And if you meet people from the old world, you'll understand instead of get angry at them. You'll understand that you don't want to bother with them, or you do. That's up to you. And the tougher the job, meaning the older the values. And the older the values, the more difficult it is to change. Do you understand why? Because old values provide a way of life, a way of reacting in the environment without thinking about it. You just automatically react. So the old values are harder to change because there's no fundamentals you can point to. You can say to a bridge engineer, if you use rivets, it'll be stronger, or if you use welding, it'll be the strongest. There's a referent there, always. But in the old days, the guy said, believe me, I'll make it strong. Well, that's something you can't use unless they identify what they're talking about. Okay? You won't have to sell people on anything in the future. They'll ask, what does that camera do that the cameras previous to that didn't do? It automatically focuses. It automatically allows for light dispersion, you know. It automatically records that which is relevant and doesn't record that which is not relevant. If you had a meeting and you had microphones and somebody brought up a question, what if I don't want to live with that guy? It's not even recorded. The guy knows where to go. After he gets through asking questions, they know where to send him. Do you understand what that means? By the question a person asks, you know what they need. If a person says, how can I make plants grow faster? He's interested in the theory, he's interested in agronomy, he's interested in those factors related to rapid plant growth and nutrition. So the questions asked would be pretty much relevant. I can't imagine after the transition kids asking unusual questions. I can't imagine it. Any questions about that? As you understand, as they get older, as new ideas come out, new inventions, they will be updated. Updated means if they can't visualize, there'll be animation to show them how things go together, show them how seeds take nutrients in, and how circulation occurs in plants. All that will be animated, rather than saying the plant takes fluid from the roots and it'll be animated. You understand? To give them a visual concept, because they can't always imagine how a plant operates. They'll be shown how babies absorb nutrients from the mother through the umbilical cord. They'll be shown that your children are not necessarily like you. They may look like you, but they are not any real different than other children, unless you have a physical disability, a hereditary physical disorder, or gene damage. And if there's gene damage, I think that can be detected very early in the future, because people are concerned. They don't want a person to come in with the last stages of cancer. Say, I have a terrible headache, and I've had it for months. Did you go for a medical checkup? No. That's why in the future there'll be very few surprises. You think you know what I mean by that? You only get surprised when a person says, well, maybe this will go away. I'll wait a month before I go to the doctor. Those decisions are made by purchasing power, or they're made by other obligations. I have to attend my son's graduation, and I don't want to be hospitalized now. Do you understand? The options of the future are very different. So if you say, well, I can't imagine anybody behaving at variance with the future. Can you? If they're brought up in that kind of environment. I can't imagine a form of aberrant behavior unrelated to the environment. I can't imagine it.
Do you want to go over any education in terms of like transition? Because that's where all the problems will be.
The transition is the problem area, where different methods will be tried. A film that would move people in the South is not the same film that would move people in Maine. So you'll have to study how people learn in different areas. And then you'll have to learn how to take the byproducts of this culture, such as gangs that beat up gays or beat up Lutherans or Catholics because they're brought up not to like them. You'll have to learn how you work with those kids. Now, it's something like this. Say there's 5 children, and you bring in a aberrated kid into that system. Once the aberrated kid becomes normal to the new environment, you release the first kid, then you bring a new kid in. The kid is always put in an environment. Like if one kid says, hey, let's give Billy a hot foot, he's asleep. Put a match on his shoe, and just give him a hot foot. The other kids say, we don't see any fun in that. In other words, he's not around the kind of kids that say, hey, that's a good idea. Where the hell did they come from? They're all aberrated. So you have to take aberrated kids and put them in a less aberrated environment where kids in the new environment have abilities that they admire. They can lift more weight, they can get the ball in the basket. They have to have qualities that the kids identify with. You're smart, I'll listen to you. But if they have qualities such as mathematics, chemistry, those are not qualities normal people will identify with. So you first have to have identification. People will not fall in line in an area of, even though the people are more intelligent, they call them geeks or whatever it is, because as long as they associate with the old world, they will tend to preserve that because that's their identity. If you take away the identity of a person, they will fight back. So the people in the new environment must have identification with the kids coming in. Otherwise it won't work. If a person says, well, how do you know it won't work? Well, take the musical people, put them in line with non-musical people. It doesn't work. We know a lot of things that work, but we don't have the sanity yet to apply it. Or we use, don't you see how foolish you are to make that statement? When you talk that way, it operates under the assumption of the magic of words, that words can turn people around. Words are sounds we make that affect the behavior of people and the values of people. If you make the wrong sounds, you don't get the right reactions, that is, the reactions you expected. But in the future, the science of communication will be more like behavioral engineering, making sounds that produce certain types of behavior. I think monkeys make sounds when a tiger comes into the environment. They chirp or they make certain sounds, and all the other monkeys make those sounds. Well, that's fortunate. They make different sounds for different conditions. Language, a lot of the sounds we make are projected. We assume. And so by telling a person clearly, don't do that, that's going to stop them from doing that. That's not conditioning. Language is not conditioning unless they're conditioned to language. Who makes a decision as to what branch of research will be done? The nature of the problems. Is that clear? The nature of the problems determine what has to be done. Now, how do you know which system is the best? How well it works? If the new system is installed and it works, it's used. If it works in certain areas, you indicate it works in limited areas. We don't know enough about it. You're the one that monitors the results. If you want a plastic that can take impact and stretch and compression, you have to specify what those qualities are. Otherwise, you can't do research in it. And there's no contest that you made metal with bigger memory than his metal. Nobody gives a damn. But they would like you to share your ideas with him so that he learns more about what you're doing. There's no more, that's my idea. You understand what I mean? I've tried a lot of different systems. I've lived in hobo camps. I use the word hobo because that's the word they used. But they were just like ordinary people that had their own point of view. I met a young kid in Grand Central Station. He must have been 13 years old. I was about 14. And he said he had a suit, he was well-dressed, he had a wallet, lots of money. And he said, would you like to be comfortable and have a lot of money? I said, well, what do you do? He says, I wait for queers in the station. Then I go home with the queer. And when he gets down on his knees to blow me, I hit him in the chin, knock him out, and steal everything. And he doesn't report it to the police because he's queer. So that's how I come on all right. See, he was brought up to hate queers, to think they're abnormal. It doesn't matter if you kill them or rob them or whatever what you do. But they don't understand that a Lutheran is a queer to a Catholic. Seventh-day Adventist is queer to a Jew. Everybody's queer to somebody else. But it's not free will that makes a person queer. It's the environment they're reared in. If you get more understanding for older people, if you only associate with older people and they inform you far better, you're going to seek out older people. They say, well, the trouble with Larry is he likes older people only. No, older people reinforced him. Younger people did not. So he became queer for older people. Do you understand what I mean? But if you get mad at them, you don't understand the effects of environment on behavior. So if you have any questions, specifics, now is the time to bring them up. If you play these tapes, it works on area by area. So the next time we get together, we'll cover different areas, how to generate maybe original thinking, what they call original thinking. Original thinking is asking relevant questions. That's what it means. Irrelevant questions. Why did that guy beat up his grandmother? Because he hates his grandmother. That doesn't tell you a fucking thing. Doesn't say why he beat her up or anything. His values are so aberrated, it doesn't even pay to deal with that aspect of the language. So we have to talk about revising our methods of looking at things. What about natural methods? Natural methods take too long. It may take 200 years or 3 generations for people to come around to better thinking. Do you understand what I mean? Whereas if you're a member of the Ku Klux Klan, you can't come around in a week and a half. You might come around in 3 months if the information put forth meets with your methods of evaluation. Do you understand? Okay. So that will give you the guts to think about things, if you want to think about things like that. If you use the word right and wrong, you got problems, because you can say that the behavior of a farmer has more correlation with the nature of what he's growing and what he's growing it for. His behavior is related. But a carpenter doesn't understand a farmer's behavior. A farmer's behavior is based upon the plants, their condition, moisture, whatever he knows. So he can tell you how to raise chickens if he's around chickens a lot. If he's not around chickens, he can't tell you. Then after you're around chickens, if you know what to look for, more so than a guy that just has 50 chickens, if you know what to look for, you can learn more about chickens than the experts today on chicken behavior. Do you understand what I'm talking about? If you know what to look for? Okay. You have to look for the conditions that produce aggression, non-constructive aggression. If a guy insults another guy and the guy grabs him and says, "What did you say?" He says, "I didn't mean nothing by that. You better take it back. I'll beat the shit out of you." Well, you can't reason with that guy, but you can tell him that if you were brought up in Italy or France, you'd behave this way. He may catch a little bit of that, but not be able to transfer it into his life yet. But with time, you can do almost anything. That's about it for today, I would say. And people have to discuss these tapes. When you run them, say, have a discussion about them.
I guess just like now, but in the future more so, a lot will depend on films for people, wouldn't it?
Yes, lots of films have to be made for different people. And the film that the person observes should be able to give them answers. If you turn to them and say, "What makes this guy so proud of being a Lutheran?" they can explain exactly in detail without being confused. Then you know, examinations in the future is how well the system works, not a test, not an IQ test. You know what I mean? Because that doesn't tell you anything. Do you remember my IQ test for the primitive people? Do you remember that where we get in a nuclear war? I don't know if you know this one, Larry. And 10 people escape the Earth, and escape the area, and they crash in the Amazon jungle, and they're not killed. And the natives want to know how intelligent they are. So they ask them, what kind of animal went by here? And they say, went by where? They go, can't you see the way the grass is parted? Oh, yeah. Which way was the animal going? I don't know. You can tell by the branches lean. How big was the animal? You can tell by the distance of their footprints and what it weighed by the impression they made. And if you know animals, you can tell the hoof that it was a guinea pig or it was an elephant. If you don't know those things, you can't talk much about it. You can just say some animal went by here. The guy that lived there for 40 years, he can tell you not only the animal, but how old it was, by the hairs caught in the weeds as it walked forward. Do you understand what I mean? So if you look there and say, boy, I admire that guy's knowledge. No, he lived there 40 years, you didn't. He's bound to pick up stuff like that. So I would say that kids in the future would like to know how to evaluate things and where to get information to be able to evaluate things. But they don't look at a guy and say, boy, he sure knows a lot. They know he's been exposed to stuff they were never exposed to. Do you understand that? So admiration disappears and understanding replaces it. So if people don't admire people, they lose the need for one-upmanship. Instead of dealing with one-upmanship, that's a low self-sufficiency. One-upmanship is I can run faster than you, so what? Okay.
Okay.
I feel, of course, by the installation of those systems, you'll do away with a lot of problems and not have to deal with those problems. They'll never come up. And when you open conversation to normal people, to anything they want to discuss, you're bound to take 40 steps backward and 3 steps forward. You know what I mean? Because they can't ask the right questions. They don't even know what the problem is. They don't know their language is insufficient. They don't even know their society is fucked up. They don't know anything. You must assume that they know nothing. That's why you want to learn how to pinpoint events as near as you can. Closer approximations of the real world. Never there. Always closer approximations. I think that even if you made automobiles in the future that were very well made, everybody can use it. So nobody said, boy, I sure admire Joel. He's got his own car that he made. You have access to anything anybody else has. So admiration and I got this or I got that will disappear if you have access to things. If you don't, you'll have problems. So if somebody says, what if people don't go along with your philosophy? And you'll have what you've got. That's what you've got now. They don't go along with it. They don't even know it exists. So you don't have to work on everybody. You have to take a system and work on each system. And the system itself will eradicate aberrant behavior. In certain areas, of course. Okay.
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure, go ahead. We're just moving things around here.
Sure. Can you please elaborate on how you can get adequate self-image and how it relates to education?
All people seek predictability. That means they'd like to be able to predict the events of plans of time in art school, learning how to draw. They want predictability. And we feel if we can give them predictability that they're satisfied with, they will utilize that system. Giving them predictability. When you predict, all your predictions are wrong, you can say the world is all mixed up. No, it's your inability to predict. When somebody falls in love with another person, they say they're wonderful. 3 months later, you say, how are you doing? Oh, I left that person. Well, they have very little predictability in behavior. And so they have more aberrated responses than reasonable responses. If you have predictability, improve your self-image.
But if I have predictability and my self-image not adequate, if I can't have predictability, can I have, if I have only predictability if I have adequate self-image, or I can have predictability and my self-image still would be not adequate?
The self-image is generated by your lack of predictability or your ability to predict. Byproduct of either one of those factors, the self-image. If your predictability is accurate, you have a higher self-image. If it's inaccurate, you might blame the other person rather than your inability to handle that situation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Nate from Iowa. I just wanted to let everyone know that the research team basically has acquired virtual land in a Second Life type environment. It's a 3D social network that can be used for educating and building 3D replicas of all the cities, of the maglev trains, everything you can think of. And I just want to know if Jacques would like to have us use those resources in a 3D virtual environment to show people what a resource-based economy could be like, what the cities would be like, and all that stuff.
Jacques is not that familiar with Second Life, and I'd have to take him on a tour of Second Life in order to answer that.
Got it. Yeah, I will. Yeah, Roxanne, just contact me, and I can help out with the tour and show you guys the virtual land that we have now for free.
Okay, sounds good. In this money system, what type of job would Jacques recommend working in order to survive and contribute toward this new direction?
Whatever you're equipped to do. And if you go to school to study robotics, a field that would have a future and improve your ability to understand the principles of electronics, chemistry, whatever you're able to study. The more physical sciences you're aware of, the more contributions you can make.
Is the Venus Project aware of the New Zealand project? We were aware of it, and it says, are they working with the Venus Project? No, they're not working with the Venus Project at this time. We were aware of them when they first started, but we haven't looked into it much lately. They were off in different directions than the Venus Project with a lot of things at that time. I don't know what they're doing now. Do you have any ideas on how to teach highly theoretical subjects of science and in schools or universities, since it's hard or sometimes impossible to get an insight from nature?
You make films that are animated, showing your concepts in animation, and various types of animation for various conditions that people would come under. In other words, if a person is not familiar with technology at all, then you have to make a series of films that lead up to that. You have to fill in the missing gaps.
Jacques, what was your process to minimize your debt? Jacques never had any debt. He never bought anything unless he could afford it. I see you didn't buy a $200,000 home, but instead bought land and built your own home. Yes, we built little by little and just built when we had the next job. Couldn't build what we wanted to build, but what we could afford to build. Could you talk about other things you did to minimize your dependency on this money environment?
I never really invested in the monetary system, and I spent most of my time working on inventions that might be commercial at the time, and I would sell it outright to get the money to go back to my lab and do what I wanted to do. In other words, I would sell inventions and ideas to get the money to go back to the lab to investigate whatever I was interested in investigating.
How do you increase your interest and enthusiasm towards studying?
Well, I don't have those attitudes, but I work on a person. If they learn something, I use that system. If that system doesn't work on other people, I have to devise systems that do work on various people with various backgrounds and different experiences. And that can only come about by exposure.
how the educational model of cognitive functionally different from behavioralist model?
I'm not quite sure I understand that question. Cognitive functionality is different from the behavioral model. You'd have to know what makes that difference. And if you don't know what makes the difference, you do research to try to find out. And if you can't find out, say, I do not have information in that area. Leave it alone.
Why is it that many cognitives hate the Skinnerian model?
B.F. Skinner, that would require a personal discussion. I cannot give you an answer. Like, there are really no answers to many questions, but there are descriptions of the variations in conditioning that produce those discrepancies.
The results of cognitivism on motivation are different interpretations of behaviorism itself.
I've answered that.
Will there be degrees or diplomas in specific fields in the future to determine who should be allowed to teach in schools?
There will be a measuring system that determines the effectiveness of your ability to teach. That can be measured by the results of the pupil in the class or the students. If most students seem to qualify and are able to perform well, then that system will be used. If the system you use does not affect kids in the way you would like to, then the system would be modified.
Do you think our current calendar is irrelevant to our way of living? Would you go back to the more natural cyclical, where did that go?
I'm not sure of how
Cyclical
you mean
calendar
that.
system. How would our calendar work in the new system? In this new system? Would you use a
It
different
depends on
calendar?
how far along you are. The calendar only works in terms of its relevance to that new system. I can't discuss that with you because I don't know when and how far into the future. I'm sorry, I'm unable to answer that question.
At some point in time, you had a boss which gave you money to eat and survive, but over time you minimized the dependency to the point where you didn't need a boss. Could you list how this occurred over time and what you did to achieve this?
I mentioned before, I invented things and sold the invention outright. That's how I got the money.
Did you ever have a boss? In the aircraft industry, you did have a boss.
Well, he just said, just do whatever you think you can do to help make airplanes safer. He did not order me to do anything except that I was to invent safety devices for aircraft. But I had to know what the problems were before I even started.
Does the Venus Project support the third industrial revolution of Rifkin? TRA is a five-line purpose of distributed clean energy abundance, which is beginning to be supported by some governments.
I'm not sure I understand exactly what that process is, because you're not describing the process of Rifkin.
I don't think we're familiar with the third industrial revolution of Rifkin. Have you seen that? No. Oh, wait.
But I can't answer the question. I don't see any.
No, it's. Did you or do you have a plan to publish some materials about raising a child?
We have many different lectures on how to educate children. I've been doing that most of my life.
Yeah, we hope to publish more of those lectures from many years ago too, on all different topics. You once started reading a story to a child and then stopped and said, learn to read and you'll know how the story goes on. I would love to get more of ideas like that. I'd love to get more ideas like that. Do you want to go over that story?
Yeah, we'll probably make some more tapes. I used to read to children very young, say 4 years old or so. I used to read to them then I would read, of course, subject matter that I knew they would be interested in, not just anything. And when it came to the most interesting part of the book, I would yawn and close the book. And the child would say, well, what happened then? Then I say, if you learn to read, you can find out yourself. You don't depend on me. And the child would begin to ask me, how do I begin to learn to read? And then I proceed with that.
The idea is to give them a purpose, a reason to want to read, instead of just teaching them rote things to read.
Yes.
Give them something that they're interested in. They do it backwards today.
Yes.
How can we increase the intrinsic motivation?
When the children are educated in the future, they begin to look at things with a very critical eye. And they say, how can I improve this or that, or whatever subject they're exposed to? They are all curious in the future. All children are always curious, but they don't always have the ability to improve products. We will show them how to go about improving products, learning more about it, the origin of the product, and knowing what it is that the product is how the product is to serve. And if you can think of more ways to make a product serve the needs of people, then that method will be used in the educational system.
Do you think it's good to target sponsors and send them a press kit, I guess, direct to ask for money for an industry?
I don't understand. You can only talk about the Venus Project.
No, it's saying, do you think it's good to target an industry and send a press kit and ask for money? You think that's a good method?
No, you put out, if it takes you so long to develop an approach to a problem, then you ask for a given fee. If you tell them what it's to be used for, making a film, building a new research lab, housing more people here, yes, if you tell them what it's for, it's all right.
Is the Venus Project going to build any construction soon on an individual base for people to see it?
That depends on the finances we have. If people make no contribution, we can't do anything.
It's talking about building something like a research center, building on other people's, yeah. Several people actually in the past have come to Jacques and asked him to build a building for somebody else's business, but he's refused a lot of that kind of thing because it wouldn't serve a purpose for the Venus Project or this direction, or he wasn't interested in just a piece of architecture for his own ego. We don't have the opportunity right now. We don't have the funding to build a larger research center. But people always do come to us, it seems pretty regularly, in regards to building a city or something like that. But for different reasons, it just doesn't come through, mainly financial. And trying to educate a religious person in the Venus Project. Okay, for religious people. I would
approach religious people by stating certain things in the Bible, like, thou shalt not kill, and love your enemy. And that would mean, if a man strikes you, turn the other cheek. That would mean that you do not participate in anything, any judgment. You never do jury duty, because it says in the Bible, judge not, lest you be judged. So you use the Bible to alter their behavior. They don't seem to understand what they're reading. So you have to help religious people understand what they're reading.
What do you think about an energy cosmos? Does it exist? And is it connected somehow with God?
I'm sorry, I can't deal with that problem. I don't understand your question. But I would tell you this, there are lots of sources of energy. There's wave power, wind power, temperature differential, geothermal power.
He's talking about energy cosmos. I don't know exactly what he means by that.
I don't either.
Yeah. Okay, are you aware of the Universal Solutions Project?
No, I'm not aware of it. Therefore, I can't say anything about it. many thousands of different projects that I'm not aware of. We're not able to keep up with all the different ideas. We have a schedule here, and we have to try to answer questions from people all over the world. And there are many questions we can't answer because we don't have enough information on all those subjects.
In a transition by design, later than film, university cities, what are the best order lines to assure a resource-based economy? First, energy abundance. Okay, what are the best lines to assure a resource-based economy? First, energy abundance. Second, efficiency solutions. Third, environmental protection. Later, join monitored net, or how?
Well, I'm sorry I can't answer that either because it depends on the funds available.
I don't know if he's talking about after a transition. What are the priorities for setting up a resource-based economy?
I can't speculate on that. It depends on how much people do and how much funds are put up to do the first city. Will the city be designed for 1,000 people, 200 people, 10,000 people? I don't know. I can't answer that. Depends on what people do, what they make available.
If we had the ability to do a resource-based economy, however that might come about, what are the orders of priority that would be done?
The first priority is that the planners work on the first city based on the designs of the Venus Project. With that accomplished, we then translate the methods by the planners for putting up permanent cities automatically. We'll try to design a system to put up 25 or 30 cities at a time, depending on how much is available.
Does the Venus Project support the Earth Charter? We were at a gathering for the Earth Charter, a celebration that they had. I think it was 10 years. But it's not really something that we particularly support. We thought it was way off in terms of what they were advocating. What do you mean when you say that people will be high individuals in the future? Isn't individuality a bullshit term?
Yes, it is. Individuality is a bullshit term.
And you did use it when Gazeki was interviewing you, and actually we put it in the new documentary.
Yes.
In terms of there would be a lot of individuality.
Yes, meaning that people would be brought up in different areas, and the areas that they seek would be different from one another, modified slightly, and that would produce a great deal of individuality. Individuality means unique exposure to different concepts.
There'd be a much broader range.
Yes.
In the future too. What type of opportunities that they would have. You do use that word sometimes to bridge the gap with people in a quick way.
They would have to write a report as to what they wish to investigate and what they needed to do that investigation.
Any other questions?
We have a question from the chat room. Do you think adults coming to TVP with a life of already formed beliefs, biased, can learn and become competent with TVP materials?
No, I do not think so. They have to learn all about the Venus Project's approach to different problems and to question it. And once they begin to understand how the Venus Project operates and its basis for making decisions, then they will be qualified. Until that time, no.
I think he is asking if they could learn about it.
Yes, they could learn.
Sure.
They can learn how. We can submit them to information that they lack.
Thanks a lot for the opportunity. So, Jock, is there, within the Venus Project's recommended reading list of all the resources of books that were available, is there a hierarchical approach that new people adults who want to learn this material, is there a hierarchical order that they should be maybe reading those books in?
Read the best that money can buy at least twice. Read that book, and that'll give you a general overall view of our intentions in design. Procedures.
Are you talking about the books on the book list?
I'm referring to the books on the recommended reading list. Inside is like I think about 80 of them or something. Another question with some of that reading material, like I'm reading one of the books called Rhetoric of Motives by Kenneth Berkey, and it deals with a lot of philosophical, historical, abstract ideas with different systems. And I'm wondering, what's the best way to go about all this abstract information and make it so I can comprehend it a lot more quickly?
I don't know what you're referring to.
Can you repeat?
You have to give me a specific example.
Yeah. Can you repeat the name of that book again?
There's two of them by the same author. One's called The Rhetoric of Motives. The other one's called, I'm not sure. It's something to do with motives as well. But I can't remember the title. His name is Kenneth Berkey.
Is it Grammar of Motives?
Correct. Thanks, Andrew. Yep.
No, because that never had the design of a system in there to do away with most of the problems. You see, many books talk about and around the subject, but they don't really get into the real cause of and factors that shape human behavior.
I would say there's a little bit in each of those books that are relevant, and there's a lot of, it's very wordy, a lot of the books. Yeah, if you have a good background on this topic, I would say through the best that money can't buy, you'd be able to wade through what's relevant in a lot of those other books and what's not.
Yes.
Do you believe in toroidal?
I have never seen it demonstrated yet. I've heard about it, but I've never seen a demonstration.
Do you have a good relationship with the World Future Foundation? Are you talking about the World Future Society? Not sure of the World Future Foundation. Why do they not support the Venus Project?
Because they're part of the price system, the monetary system.
The World Future Society is, I'm not sure.
Does not concern itself with the social system. They never talk about it.
The same thing with Kurzweil, Diomedes, and Kaku. Why did they not support the Venus Project?
Because they probably don't even know about it, nor would they understand it without a personal meeting.
Yes, I think I've heard somebody ask Kurzweil recently if they've heard of the Venus Project and they haven't heard of it, or he hadn't heard of it. I'm not sure if that's true.
If he has heard of it, it would probably be on his kurzweilai.com. He does a lot of research. There's a lot of articles to different organizations there.
None of those people, as far as I know, touch the real problem. They don't touch the monetary system, so they're safe. And they can keep whatever standing they have within the system.
You got to remember that top scientists today are supported by the system. And they think just like any other person. They're part of the system. They wouldn't work for the drug companies. They wouldn't work on individual chemical problems without studying the adverse effect of the chemicals they're talking about. In other words, it's very hard to work for a corporation and yet attack the corporation you work for. I hope you understand what I'm saying. They're establishment-oriented.
Not all the scientists who work in these institutions are corrupt. You know, they actually do speak out against corruption in their organizations, like with the FDA. I could pull up a document of scientists complaining about corruption in the FDA.
That's great. A lot of times they lose their job if they do.
Yes, I agree with that.
Well, I mean, as long as you if you publish a public statement, you know, it's going to be difficult for the corporation to just fire you without public outrage.
Newspaper, newsreels, NBC is owned by GE. It's very difficult to any major broadcasting company to attack the system that supports them.
Daha has a question here that reads, I'm reading it. how will the first city operate while other cities, states, and countries are still operating in a monetary-based system, and how will they access the resources, or will it?
And the Venus Project will not exist. It's only after the monetary system does not work, when they have lack of funds and they begin to shut down, not only General Motors, but most industries. The public will not have the purchasing power to buy the goods and services, and that's when the system comes to an end. Otherwise, the Venus Project will not work during a monetary system.
We have talked to people who have wanted Jacques to design cities, and we would take it as far as we could go. We would bring in the participation of the universities and students and introduce them to this direction as much as possible. So if we had the opportunity to do a city that Jacques agreed to do within this system, we would, as we said, we would educate towards a resource-based economy as much as possible. We would have as much say as we could within how the children would be educated and what would be done in the city. Like a theme park of the future, if we could do a theme park of the future in the first city to bring in even revenue for the city to exist more efficiently, so we didn't have to go on the outside. If we're working within the monetary system, we would show more readily within the theme park, not just entertainment, but what a resource-based economy would look like in the future. So we would use it as much as possible.
Sarah's asking a question about a research centre, that if she wanted to start up sort of getting funds for a research centre, you know, could she use the TVP images and have a bank account, you know, under TVP for that? Is that something, you know, you could discuss with Sarah afterwards through Skype or by telephone or something? I mean, I'm sure it's not something you could just, you know, quickly answer to in a TeamSpeak conversation or Q&A.
Yeah, we could talk to her afterwards. Sure.
What does Jacques think about cryopreservation, and if he is willing to cryopreserve himself? Cryopreserve himself.
You're talking about cryonics. What do you think about cryonics and preserving yourself?
I don't think about it. I think it's a waste of time.
Why is that?
Well, what are you going to do? Bring all your relatives into the future? And then what's it for? In other words, you just put all you hope that in time man will learn to condition and get rid of aberrant conditions or cancer or heart disease. But what are you bringing the people of the past into the future for? What are you doing that for? You'd have to educate them. Isn't it wiser to work on new generations and kids? Why bring the old folks back? They've made no contribution.
Would you want to be put in?
Would I want to be frozen? No, not at all.
I would just like to ask if Jacques can recommend any books specific to education, to the topic that we were discussing today. Is it any books that are to the point about education?
Not to my knowledge.
There are certain books on behaviorism, like Skinner, but it's not exactly about this.
No.
There's a little section in The Best That Money Can't Buy on education, Jacques' book.
Roxanne, that goes for me as well. Basically the same question, but about children.
I mean, are there any books for children, or?
Basically about educating children.
I would say if you want to educate children, teach them what's going on in the real world. Teach them the physical reality of the real world. You know, it starts with things of how.
Stay away from Mickey Mouse clubs and all the fairy tales that children are given. Bring them up with reality. There's enough excitement in reality. You don't need fairy tales. It's tough enough to deal with the real world.
Children have to undo all that too, and it's very difficult. You give them a real head start if you teach them how nature works, how mechanics work, how machines work.
And the theory of religion. That's a theory. It's not based upon fact. A theory of evolution is based on findings. It's based on research. It's based on comparative anatomy of earlier people that lived long before us. It's based upon something, but religion is based upon superstition, feelings, convictions that people have within themselves, but it's not based on anything that can be demonstrated.
Yeah, teach them science and teach them about this type of direction for the future. What an alternative could be for the future.
Don't forget, many people today are against abortion because they feel it takes a life. Well, how come they don't line up when we go to war, which takes the lives of thousands of people and millions of children and pregnant women and older people? And war is the most horrible expression of humanity. Why don't they oppose war? Because they're very simple people. They don't seem to understand the effectiveness of one system as against another. They have no methods of evaluation. They are highly unqualified.
Very useful information, thank you.
What's your definition of ego?
If you know what one-upmanship means, to try to stand above the crowd and put yourself in the leadership position and praise yourself rather than community service, rather than working for the benefit of humanity. Ego is when a person says, I can run faster than you. So what? If I can do math problems faster than you, that's ego. But sharing your ideas is cooperation. This is what will enable the future to evolve. The sharing of ideas, not privatization.
It's usually a low self-image too, isn't it, ego?
Yes, no self-image. Many scientists today understand that they're able to do what they do because they stood on the shoulders of giants, that other people help them. That's what they mean. That your ego is when you think that you're doing it all yourself, without the help of books, other people that made contributions to your life. Any sane person would tell you that they were influenced by many different writers.
The other question from the audience is, isn't it easier to sell your projects to businessmen around the world, for example, food-growing aeroponics farms, and then build those farms and then give a start to your projects?
No, that wouldn't work without redesigning the way people think. If you don't change the way people think, they will produce the same problems over and over again.
That would be very difficult to do within the monetary system as well. Make something and then give it away.
I have a question in regards to a previous inquiry that was asked about a week or two ago. Somebody asked how people would be apprehended in the Venus Project, and Jacques' answer was, if people had access to abundance, people had access to everything without a price tag, then there wouldn't be no violence. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, if someone's walking out of the distribution center, all of a sudden somebody punches that person in the face, how then does that person get restrained?
The person probably has brain damage and they call for help, because there's no reason for a person to punch another person, because people are brought up not to hate or disagree or argue. They're brought up in a way that they say, I don't know the answer to that problem. I'm going to try to find out. They don't make value judgments abruptly. If a person behaves aberrantly in the future, if that were to occur, either they've been hit on the head or damaged in some way, or have brain damage, which manifests itself that way.
Is there a group of people that would take care of that situation? I think he's asking.
Everybody would be qualified and know how to take care of that situation. And they know who to contact for that. That would be the Special Contingencies Group. that are designed to handle problems that are not typical.
What I'd like to know is, what do you think the procedure would be in apprehending this person? For example, here in modern day times, you have the police, they handcuff them. What would be the routine in a resource-based economy?
Well, first of all, if you understand the resource-based economy, people are checked out in the schools when they're very young. They're made sure that they're in good shape before they even go through the schools. And when they go through the schools, they can answer all questions, and they don't tend to get angry, they don't fight, they don't get into arguments, because they're brought up differently than the way they're brought up today. You're asking about today's problems, and you're projecting them into the future. It's very difficult for people to project into the future, because they always project their own value systems into the future. Those values do not exist. Most Americans don't go for bullfights or feeding Christians to lions. That behavior has been surpassed a long time ago.
Something to bear in mind is that during the transition, you would still need some kind of police keeping force, in the sense of a civil force to take care of social problems such as that during the transition, because you couldn't just go with the values that we've got today and take away the police. It would be absolute chaos because of the values that are currently held. So what Jacques talking about with the Venus Project's values, once we're in that situation, once children are starting to go through that schooling and they understand more by the time they get to the age of adulthood, they wouldn't get into the same kind of arguments that you get nowadays, because the values would be very different, the education would be very different. So it's really only a transitionary period where you would still have some kind of policing force that would have, that would be available to restrain people that are being violent, etc., and incarcerate them into mental hospitals or whatever's needed to take care of those people. But obviously, once you get past that transitionary step and people are starting to be educated into a new set of values, those behaviours start to drop off and you wouldn't need them anymore.
I've covered that many times on the air. I said that the transition will be painful, and it will be violent, and there'll be assassinations. Yes, it'll be a terrible time, but we have to go through that in order to arrive at the Venus Project, or the resource-based economy. Now that's accurate, Andrew. What you just said makes sense. The transition will have temporary methods for dealing with all those problems, and there'll be conventional methods used even as they are today, only during the transition.
But you don't see the police the same as they are today.
No, they're voluntary services, and they're schooled in how to treat people.
Okay, I guess that's about it. Until next week, thank you everyone for showing up.
Thank you very much for your questions. I'm sorry I was unable to answer all your questions, but there's certain things I don't have information on, and I honestly cannot answer those questions. Anyway, thanks for your inquiry, and we hope to do whatever we can to help you understand more about the Venus Project.
Thanks again.
Thank you for your time and effort, Jacques. Really appreciate it every week. I'm sure everyone appreciates it. And we'll see everyone next week. Thanks.